Hey everyone, I'm Peter Askim. I'm a composer and conductor and the artistic director of the Next Festival of Emerging Artists. We are in our second week of our Next Festival 2021, and it's been an amazing journey so far. This week we're focusing on social justice and activism, and we have an incredible panel discussion for you here tonight. So last year, we were really fortunate to have three fellows at the festival who started really compelling organizations, like really important, wonderful projects that have turned into amazing things over the course of the last year. And as part of this focus on social justice and activism, I thought it was important to have them on and talk about their journey and why they started these organizations and what their journey has been, bringing them to life, the challenges and the things that have gone really well, and to talk with our artist in residence, who is Seth Parker Woods. He did an amazing talk for us last week. And I'm just really looking forward to kind of a deep dive into the process that these young artists have gone through to bring a dream to life, to put good out into the world through their art. Um, yeah, so I'm going to turn it over to Seth, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from everybody. Glad you're all here. And if you're on Zoom and you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll get to those. And Seth, take it away. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Peter, and hello and welcome everyone, or welcome back. Lots of faces I've seen once before, so great to see you all again here today. We are definitely joined by some amazing younger colleagues, younger peers, who are all doing amazing things in the world. And so I'm excited to kind of be in conversation with all of them. We have Julio in New York City. We have Sam Zagnit in New York City, also in Brooklyn, Brooklyn and Connecticut, I think. And then we have Ana, who is in Denver, Colorado. And I am currently here coming at you from Los Angeles at the moment. So we're from all the coasts here. So today we're definitely going to be talking, most importantly, about citizen artistry, artistry, performativity, and activism representation within our field that we are calling classical music under the larger umbrella. Um, these amazing individuals here have all kind of started their own organizations either within this pandemic or before, but have been pushing towards forms of different forms of change within the field, whether it's in education, performance, commissioning, for bringing awareness, enlightenment to the field in ways that stories have kind of necessarily been disregarded or washed away. So I want to start. Let's start with Ana, who kind of can give us a more fuller introduction for those that do not know her and the work that you're doing.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to see some familiar names also. I'm so excited to be here in community with everyone. I am first and foremost a violinist, and I finished my master's degree in violin during the pandemic in June of 2020. And I'm now in Denver and I wear many hats in my professional life. So I'm an active performer, but I also do a lot of arts administration for several organizations in town, as well as teaching, which I'm kind of turning away from a little bit for now. And I started Performers for Change specifically, which is the project I was brought on to talk about during June of 2020. And it was to encourage performing artists to participate in a series of concerts that were aimed at creating some sort of change in communities around the United States. So what happened was that a lot of our artists came together, they chose their repertoire, they chose where the money was going to go that we would collect during the concert, and they each got paid as well to perform. So the project really hoped to encourage social change and be open to creating a really open space for folks to be able to pick their own repertoire, bring their full selves as artists to the table, and we had mainly musicians and dancers. So that will be changing soon. But that's mainly what I was brought here to talk about. I also am the director of the Alliance for Music Education Equity in Denver, which is a fairly new organization as well, not created by me, but I was just brought on as their first director. And I work with El Sistema, Colorado as well. So I'm sure we'll be talking more about that later, but I'll leave my introduction there. and have Jay or Sam go next.
Oh, is this a point at me? Okay. Well, hi, I'm Sam Zagnit. I also kind of I'm also a multi-hat wearer these days, but I'd love to kind of talk about today what I've been working on with a bunch of colleagues of mine for the past year, which is bass players for Black composers. We are a collective of bass players, patrons, composers, basically anybody who's really enthusiastic about new music, but we're dedicated to not only commissioning more works for bass by Black composers, but actively engaging in educational programs and any kind of outreach things or kind of talks at universities, kind of geared at making sure that not only these works are made and performed, but they keep being performed and they keep being programmed and make their way into the classical music canon. And that's kind of a really big part of kind of, this overarching question for us, which is, why are we playing music by Black composers? And why is it so important? And really the idea is that the commitment to play these works not because they've never been heard before or because they're not programmed, so maybe they're not as good, but really it's kind of this commitment to play these works because they are just as good and to continue commissioning these works as everything else is out there. But when you think about kind of the overarching history of systemic racism in classical music, a lot of works have been kind of systemically cast aside and kind of erased. And so that's kind of a big mission for us, like a kind of aside from just commissioning. So that's kind of what we were about. And I will hand it over to Jay.
So great, Jay.
Hello, and again, hello to all the very familiar faces and some unfamiliar names on the screen. Of course, I'm Jay. I play a couple different string instruments, but you probably know me as either a violinist or a violist. I head Sound Off Music for Bail, which is a musical abolitionist collective that works to present concerts that raise money for bail funds across the country, as well as feature speakers from communities that are most hard hit by the U.S. prison industrial complex, as well as its many forms that often reach around the entire world. It's been a huge honor to collaborate with Sam and Ana Luna in the past, actually. I kind of wanted to go last because of that. It's been incredible to be in this work with other people. We all sort of have based our ideas of organizations around a collective model, and I think that's where so much of our power comes from, that it's not centralized around even just one person's ideas or MO. As great as it might be, it is really responsive to the needs of the community around, and also the community that these organizations are part of. We specifically, sort of our model is producing these concerts with the funds generated from our other programming, which has taken the place of engrave-a-thons, which take the music of composers who are underrepresented in the canon and create new editions. We've also had workshops that teach musics that have perhaps been also underutilized in the typical conservatory medium, as well as having talks and roundtables. As we were talking before the Zoom started, it's really nice to be on roundtables like this with like-minded people and people who are very much open to learning and sharing ideas. I want to thank you so much again for having all of us here. I'm really excited for this.
You all are always so inspiring, this generation below me. Maybe you're two generations, I'm not really sure. But inspiring nonetheless. And it's always exciting to kind of see what everyone is up to. You see the names pop up, especially on social media, the days of social media and tech. But it's always exciting to kind of hear your actual stories and why you got into the work that you're doing, and kind of, and that's not even talking about your own artistry, but more so what you're doing for the field for specific communities as they relate to certain geographic areas across the country. But of course, these programs aren't only specific to those areas. They should also hopefully reach the entire country and be a model, a global model for what is possible. Because I think sometimes when we think about justice, we think about activism, we think about cultural and racial relations in turmoil, or conflict, as it's likely called in media. Um, it sometimes tends to be centered around a very US kind of issue or polarity. Um, and for me, someone that has lived all over the world, you start to see that these issues are global. And everyone is dealing with them in different ways, or not dealing with them. So applause to you all for starting out. So my first question to kind of kick things off is 3 words. What is justice, change, and representation? What do those words mean for you? What are they for you? And feel free to come on. I'm not going to, each of you can just choose when you'd like to answer that and how you'd like to answer it.
I can go first again. I won't do it next time, I promise. So and I can get into this more later. I'm currently doing a 6-month leadership cohort in social justice, restorative practices, and arts engagement specifically. So for me, when I think about justice, I've been thinking a lot about liberation and what that means. And so the liberation of all peoples through mobilization, accountability, organizing, art, restorative practices, and we can get more into that later. And change means that systems are being not only redirected, but torn down and rebuilt to better serve the communities that they're supposed to serve, whichever community that is. And connected to that, I think representation means, I'm in music education a lot as well, so that any child, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, religion, sees themselves reflected in their teachers, their artists, the music that they're listening to, the history they're being taught. And I think representation to me in Denver specifically is a really huge issue, as being just a very, very white-led, at least in the arts community, field. And so just making sure that our students and people who come after us are seeing change in like who is leading them, and that looks like them, and like the person next to them.
Amazing. Jay, Sam? It's not an easy question to answer. It's not. And it's still multi-pronged in so many ways. So don't feel there's no wrong answer, and we're going to extrapolate.
I could jump in for a second if that's okay. I feel like, what everything that Ana Luna is saying is really kind of resonating with me too, because I feel like there's the word restorative, I think, is very important when we talk about justice, where we're taking steps to not only right the wrongs, but then to actively create a better and equitable place. So it's not just kind of, we're not stopping, at the halfway point. So it's not just the kind of idea of retribution, right? But it's like, how can we create a space that will never allow this to happen again? And I also feel like it ties in really well to representation, this idea of no one being denied access. And I guess in more a context of what we do at BPBC is getting these works by our composers played literally everywhere, right? To the point where we're changing audition repertoire, right? That's kind of been a big an initiative that we're trying to spearhead, is to not only kind of put these at the forefront, but also this is, you know, should be a requirement to go to music school, or, you know, you should be learning about all kinds of composers, you know, kind of no matter what you're doing. A big thing for us is also working on getting commissions for young bass players, so that like people are actively learning about all sorts of music, right? Especially music by Black composers at really young ages, right? Because I feel like you start young, right? And if you're, for example, you're a Suzuki string player, right? What are you really going to be learning that's, you know, not a white person? And I think there's a really great initiative by Rachel Barton Pine, music by Black composers. But kind of outside of that, there's not really a ton that's going on. So it's really great, I think, in terms of just a pedagogical approach. So not only about access, but also representation in terms of like what is able to be played at this young age. And that just ends up, I think, being really important, and it ends up influencing then our choices moving forward as we get older.
Great. I have, there's like thoughts running, but I'm like, I'm gonna wait. Let's get Jay in here, and then I'm gonna like launch in. But something to think about is when you're creating such initiatives and you're talking about this work, and sometimes it's not necessarily creating a seat at the table, but sometimes most importantly, I have found, is creating that table and bringing seats to that table. Speaking, meaning to speak those names in rooms in which those people are not, most 9 times out of 10, are not invited to, will never be invited to. And if it is, by that situation, there's not enough clout that has been given to them or held for them to be able to thrive. So sometimes it's not just enough to create the initiative and to go into the schools, but sometimes it's to put, as we say, to put those people on, to directly put them on. What does that actually look like? And I want you to also think beyond, not to create, I don't want to call it a fetishization, but to focus on one demographic group of only Black bass players for Black composers, but what about Latinx composers? What about Asian identifying composers as well? These groups just with these minority groups, also Native American groups, South Asian groups. So how does one organization such as yours, Sam, expand over time? Like, so thinking about that, something we had talked about before, where is it now? You're now officially a year anniversary as far as timeline. And how does it change? How does it evolve? When we talk about the representation, we talk about the programming, we talk about the educational, the pedagogical approaches to set work. Where does it go in the 5-year goal? Where does it go in the 10-year goal, and on so forth? We're gonna come back to it. Jay?
I'm so glad I got to go last. It's so great to be able to think deeply on these questions.
You want to just keep this work at this. Next, you're going first. We'll be the first.
No, this is great. You know, I was tussling, actually, and I know we talked about this a little bit beforehand again. The one of the 3 words that I struggle the most with is that third one, representation. So I think I'm going to tackle that one because that is the hardest for me to kind of comprehend and think about. As you probably know, for any of you guys who are familiar at all with Sound Off's work, for me, representation has always been communicated to me, certainly when I'm on a DEI board or when I get interviewed for things, as sort of like a ticking, checking the box off. Like you have one seat pulled out for you, and then you realize it's at the end of the table. And if you try and shout to the other end of the table, of course, nobody's listening. And I've been in this situation alone, and I've been in sort of situations like this together with other people. And, I want to look beyond that sort of mediocre idea of representation to think about what the idea of, and we'll turn off Facebook. I want to move beyond what that means on an organizational level and think about what it means for us as individuals who are all learning together. We're all hoping to be able to represent ourselves in the best light. We're hoping to perhaps be representatives of our own communities. And I want an organization like Sound Off, or looking ahead to our brother and sister organizations like PFC and BPBC. I want all of us who are involved to be able to feel empowered to be representatives of what we stand for, to feel like we can maneuver in situations and be that force for calling for truth, calling for power for the unempowered, for the disempowered rather. I think there's so much untapped in our own training as musicians and as artists, with the power of testimony within these spaces. And it's my goal, at least with everybody involved, that we are all able to powerfully say our say our stuff, like with wonderful rhetoric, with knowledge of what it's like to be with those communities that we come from, that maybe are abstracted away from the larger classical music community as a whole, but that have our own beautiful things. So.
And so, what have you learned in telling these stories? Because when I think of justice, and this is a question I remember I was giving a concert, and I think at the Kennedy Center, and then it came up to me. The host was like, "So what is justice?" I had just finished giving this entire concept. I mean, it's a part of just social justice, activism, performativity, kind of community engagement in that way, as it is through the arts and the contemporary arts. And it's, for me, it's telling truthful, honest stories, all of the stories, in every possible way, and how you go about doing that, and there are multiple ways in which to do that. That is through the advocacy, and advocacy obviously is a large umbrella, but even through your programming, your commissioning, your consortium of commissioning, those that you are bringing in, younger peers that you're bringing onto a project, even though they possibly are even still in school, but you believe in them, and this is a great opportunity for them. How do you pair down with other arts organizations in collaboration to make sure that those stories, not necessarily those that one is performing, but those that are also performing, how do you think about history and lineage in that way? Those stories that are connected to those things that have been erased or whitewashed or just removed altogether as if they never existed. So for me, justice in many ways is that it's intertwined with representation, of course, but yes, this idea of first, only, and different, this idea as it connects to DEI is always a heavy burden for the one that is put in that position, because it's like, how did I get here? How am I the only one? Why is this one group the only thing? And then how do we bring more into the situation? What does the advisory board, if there is one, what does that look like? How is that also helping provide steering for said initiatives, especially if one is not directly in that community. It's one thing to be creating for or advocating for, but how are we also making sure that we're in the community? We're also telling the stories of the people that which we're trying to help represent as well. Let's actually talk about that. Let's talk about kind of community engagement as it relates to organizations, as it relates kind of the enmeshment inside of that community, trying to understand more that is there, especially if you're not from the said community directly. What have you learned? And have you taken steps in that direction, or is that something? And maybe you all can kind of talk about what you have done in the way of that. Let's start with Jay.
Happy to. Certainly, this is something that really cuts deep to the core of Sound Off. Growing up, I had family who were, sort of in and out of the U.S. carceral system. have a sort of a blended family, and certainly in the Philippines as we speak, every day, young men and women and children are gunned down by the police in the current drug war, um, uh, over which the current president Duterte presides. And so, moving into classical music, I often did feel sort of alone in this. The idea of like a disappeared family was felt like something I really couldn't talk about. Um, and through starting Sound Off, it was actually very interesting to find a community of musicians, primarily musicians of color, who reached out, or who I had talked to, who were like, "Oh, you and I have had some experiences in common," and for us, this is actually a moment of healing where we can actually talk pretty openly about some of our experiences, some people's from being within the system itself. And for me, this is one of the greatest lessons, that you have to be there, sort of in the trenches. If you want to do anything, you can't speak from outside. Um, of course, everybody's journey is different, but for me, this journey was a very personal one. This one is one that I hold very closely to my heart. Um, and I think all of us can sort of be led astray by different fighting forces, but um, we have, of course, a built-in system of keeping accountable. We always have speakers who come from either within or adjacent to these systems, primarily non-musicians, speaking to this. And I've been very lucky to get these contacts through my own work, outside of the musical field, my own work on legislative things, which I probably can't talk about because we can't endorse any legislation when we are a nonprofit or a 501. But we nevertheless we really try our best to be with it. That's sort of the power of being an organization such as ourselves, which strives to go deep into the trenches and yet plays classical music. We have this access to all the wonderful things that Western classical music has to offer us. All the audiences, all of the beautiful pieces, and we can pair that with people's real stories. For me, that's more than anything, so helpful. Of course, our money goes also materially back to bail funds and organizations like the Justice Committee, which holds us again to another level of accountability. And I think it's very important, especially seeing how other organizations have maybe tried and failed to do the work that does need to be done. That's why we're still here after how many years? After 300 years of Filipinos being in this country, we're still at this stage. I think through creating these sort of fail safes, we keep ourselves on the path that will hopefully lead to our liberation. I hope that answered the question.
No, it's great. You speak a lot from, yes, there's personal, but there's a lot is organizational. One thing I would like to know beyond your organization, how is it affecting you? How is it allowing you to find liberation and better understanding and growth in the work that you are doing directly, as like personally as well? Um, it's great to talk as an organization, but also, but individually, because when you're in the trenches, as you say, you know, we are faced with many things, and sometimes we're not prepared. You're like, they didn't teach me this in school. We'll talk about that, Sam, because that's literally in your bullet points. So, how has schooling prepared you for going into doing some of the work that you're doing, or how has some form of the field at large or mentorship prepared you or not prepared you, and what have you learned along the way? Um, Sam, let's shift to you with a similar area.
Yeah, so I feel like, obviously my relationship to bass players for Black composers is very different, in that I do come up from a place that's separated or outside, right, of the folks who we want to to promote and to serve. And I think, you know, it might just be a good time to just talk about how when this started, I think I was incredibly not prepared to, you know, really understand fully what that meant, to not only to kind of embark on this journey of commissioning, but also like advocacy. And I was like, oh my God, I don't want to do it. Like I don't really feel equipped. And to be honest with you, there are many times where I don't. But I think it's kind of as somebody who is removed, and what we talk about a lot with your organization is how much can we give away, and how much can we kind of remove ourselves in order to spotlight and to promote the works of others. For example, I just want to talk about this thing that we recently kind of started doing, which is called our Artist in Residence series, where we ask one of our past composers to not only pick both the composer and the player, so for our next premiere, but then to also curate their own signature concert. And so that usually is done without kind of, it's kind of all of them. And so most of the work and most of what you see on screen is just our composers. So for example, one of our composers, Mason Vines, just did a really fantastic masterclass yesterday. And it's actually still up on YouTube. You're welcome to check it out. But what I really love about that is that we go live and it's all her, you know, and that's really what we want, and that's really what we're aiming to do. It's really easy, and I think it was really easy to, especially in the beginning. And if you know, I'm not trying to, I think, hide anything, but at the very beginning, I was the one who was playing all the stuff, and that's not necessarily because I wanted to. It's just kind of because of what was happening and who was involved and who was contracted to play the concert. And I think very, very quickly, as we realized that that's just not what needs to happen, and that's not what people want to see. And you know, honestly, and I think there's a certain amount of kind of, as somebody, it's just kind of like, oh well, like, what do I do? And the answer is just like to just not is just not to do it. And so what ends up happening is that most of the time I'm behind a screen sending emails, making sure that things work smoothly, making sure that the connections need to happen, making sure that contracts get signed, so that we can really and quite deliberately feature the works of others. And that's kind of the most important thing for us in the forefront. So yeah, I know it's a little bit of a roundabout way of answering the question, but because it doesn't, I feel like I have to get it from other sides. So
No, totally. I mean, but within that idea, I'm conflicted in that to not do. I think it's more important as an initiative when we talk about growth, right? We talk about where we are, what we didn't know, what we weren't prepared for, and things that you probably were glad you didn't know, because it allowed you to be confronted with certain areas that, you know, we all have our lenses. Some of them are wider than others, some of them are more narrow than others. But it's great to be able to grow and to have those things burst open, and so you can see a wider area of the world that you probably were shielded from for a variety of reasons. That's not to point a finger of any part, but it's like, where can I grow? And if one says I'm doing great, then it's like, well, therein lies the problem. Because we can always do more. We can always do more in a way that will, you know, help you and help the field at large. But an idea is to think about, yes, there's always, I don't want to call it a guinea pig, but there's always someone that has to lead the charges for any type of initiative. And you feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders to kind of carry it through without realizing that rest and debriefing is important for the work with which one does, especially as it's connected to communities, because those are complex as they relate, and no two people within one community have the same journeys and the same needs directly. Some of them do overlap, but a thing that is interesting, as you say, for you to not do it, but maybe also bringing in bass players of color that are also to help advocate for this work, as well, to kind of give clarity, give some type of substance, or kind of coalesce it down to something, just to give also the idea of visual and representation. Um, you can talk. You can talk. I don't want you to feel like I'm talking at. This is it's a round table.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think so. Just I think to maybe give some more context. After those first couple of concerts, that was the goal. So with every concert that you see at BPBC, at least 50% of the players that you see are going to be of color, and at least means probably more than 50%, and that it was very, very clear to us that was what needed to happen, and that we're not only bass players for Black composers, but we're also bass players for Black bass players and brown bass players, and that needs to be showcased on the screen. So yes, I think it's just it's to tie it all back that way. It's like what I think I always discover and am discovering constantly in this in being a white person, is that there's always room for growth. There's always like places where I'm going to be messing up, and I'm going to be working to make sure that this is constantly going to be okay and good enough and continually better. And also, as I think it's just a growing process for me, it's a growing process for everybody involved, and that like being able to sit in this kind of uncomfortableness, is just so important. And I think, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but I think that's like a feeling that so many people are afraid of, to be able to be kind of like, oh, what I just did was not right to do, or that was really wrong, and I have to walk it back, and now I have to make this better. And I can't ignore it, and I can't just pretend it didn't happen. It's really important to address and then to move forwards. And so, part of what I do means constantly making mistakes, which is hard, but it's important, and I wouldn't really trade it for anything else, because I think it's just part of what we need to do to kind of take that restorative action to another place.
And so this is me getting even more personal. So give us an example. You can all give us examples, Jay and Ana, of mistakes or kind of things that, I don't want to say you messed up along the way, but what are the stepping stones of things that that come up, or that have come up, that you've had to kind of necessarily walk back or figure out how to make it work, because an organization can focus on a community, and we can say, oh yeah, this is the Black community, this is the Latinx community, this is the Asian American, this is the Filipino community, and then it's like, well, they don't speak for me, or that's not my story, which is completely valid, because there's no one way to be one person, or to exist inside and function inside of a singular culture. You as three individuals can speak wholeheartedly to that. So how have you navigated some of those things? And I would love for all of you to mics on and talking.
I mean, I'm happy to if to go first if you want it. It's up to yeah, then, I think a small one is not asking beforehand about pronouncing people's names. That's like that's a big one, and I think and ends up turning into even bigger, if it's not correctly addressed. And I've done it a bunch of times, and it's a kind of thing where it's about recognizing that it's happening, recognizing that it was a mistake, and then just not doing it again, you know. So it's I think it's just important to just kind of take responsibility for those moments, and then to move forward and do it right, you know. It's kind of all about, okay, well, it happened and I'm really sorry, and now I'm gonna do it better on the next time. I'm trying to think about some bigger things. But
well, while you do that, I mean, I think it's important.
I have some if you want, so that you can think about it. But when I started Performers for Change, it was like right in the middle of June 2020. I think just like you guys, Sam. And as you all know, when you start a social media project or an organization or some kind of series, usually there's no money really. You're just like, okay, I have this idea and I want to do this thing, and let me like reach out to as many of my artist friends as possible that would probably be interested in doing this. And what ended up happening, we had actually a very diverse array of artists like on these concerts. I didn't play on any of the concerts myself. I was just kind of behind the scenes, like doing these crazy live streams, and like it was nuts. But I think what I ended up realizing, like even just recently, was, well, I shouldn't have expected some of my Black colleagues to like volunteer their time to then raise money to benefit, you know, the ACLU or like, you know, other big projects like that when they were suffering so much in June. So just like really thinking about how you're asking people for favors, I think, or like how you ask for people's time. I don't think there was any crazy pushback or anyone like coming at me, but I did have a couple of artists who, you know, they were on board and then they were like, I just really can't do this. Like, I don't have, like, it's just, I don't have it in me to create right now. And so then they dropped off the project, and it was like, well, how could I have like really taken the time to not just like make this reactive like concert series to like raise all this money? That like did go really well and like folks were really happy with, but how could I have like really taken the time to maybe like not even do it in June, to just like kind of launch ideas in June and then to do it later, right? When things had kind of like settled down, so that you're not asking folks to like relive their trauma or have to like use their art for something that's so fresh, if that makes sense. So I think recently I've been just talking about restorative practices again, just like really thinking about like how performing or like serving on a panel or doing anything through PFC is going to affect the person that I'm having come on. And also like just having the funds to be able to like pay people really well for their work and like respect their time too. And I think that's what I've been struggling a lot, is like, okay, well, I need to, you know, there's some like mega fundraising and things that need to happen before like continuing to try to have people volunteer, like try to seem like I'm doing things just for the sake of like social media. Like, here, look, I did something today, I'm doing something next week. And so PFC's kind of been on pause, to be honest. Like I've done some panels. I did one with Jay and I hosted Dr. Fredara Hadley from Juilliard in March. So I've been lending my time and some funds where I can, but I think, to me, I feel really strongly about just like pausing for a second and seeing like where we're going and like what I need to make that work really authentically. So yeah, I talk a lot about reactivity now when I do these kinds of talks or like with my students or like with the other organizations I work with. But I think a lot of what happened summer of last year was a lot of reactive creation of projects and things, and that then like didn't work because the funders or the founders of these projects were just like, okay, well, this is the thing and it's great, and like that's where I stop. And so I think I'm just really careful now about like what I put out there, because it was just all of these like reactive organizations. And I'm so happy to see that, like, you know, Sam's organization is still standing and Jay's as well, because they're really self-reflective and they're constantly thinking about how to move things forward, and like being self-critical and like, how can we do this better? How can we serve folks better? How can we carry out our mission better? Does our mission change? And so that's really important to me. And that's why I'm kind of in a pause, as well as wanting to transfer it to an in-person project, because all of this happened virtually because of COVID. And so I don't really have a lot of the colleagues who helped me out or who performed or who came to work or who got paid to do workshops are in New York or Atlanta or Miami, you know, or LA. And so now I'm kind of like, okay, well, it'd be super cool to do this in Denver. And I have way more authentic connections now, especially through this like leadership cohort I'm doing and through like really digging myself into like community and volunteering and trying to reflect and like be really self-critical. And so that's kind of the next step for us, is like, how can we fit into an in-person scenario, and like what could we do in terms of like mobilization and organizing, with also arts engagement in the mix and like performing in the mix.
Well, let me pause you for just 1 second. This is all absolutely amazing. You're like, yes, I love it. I love it. So as we do, this is a huge thing, right? So where you started, you're a year in, 2 years in. I love your dog. What is so the transition? How are you thinking about transitions now to more in-person work? We talk about, you know, if we think about rooms, we think about how we move this from a virtual space to a live space. How do you now engage in direct, you know, viewership that's beyond a screen, as more and more cities are opening, more and more countries are opening up? Some, the latter, not so much yet fully, but at least here in this country, in North America, there are, on this continent, more cities are beginning to open up. More, the sense of liveness is coming back. So how do you keep the archive of what you've learned readily available still, you know, which will be great for your grant making processes, but also just references for those searching as a database, just like we have an initiative, or actually it's an institute now, the composerdiversity.com. I can put this in the thing for those that don't know this organization. We started this a few years ago, to kind of really help address finding composers of color across the board, and a wide variety of musics, not necessarily only in Western classical music. So how are you thinking about moving to new rooms and engaging in that way? Let's start with you, Ana.
That's such a difficult question, and one I'm still tackling myself, but I think for me personally with PFC, I'm really lucky to also be affiliated with an organization called Creative Strategies for Change here in Denver, which now is like fully, like all the facilitators that work for CSC are like people of color, or like it's heavily dominated by folks of color. So like all of the education that you're getting like comes from the mouths of like the people who have been historically excluded like for such a long time. And through that network of folks, I've met a lot of artists and writers and dancers. And so for me, I think it's gonna start there. And I think I really need to fundraise and like have, thank you so much for putting that in the chat. Yeah, they're incredible. And they encompass fully what the journey of social justice in the arts is. And we don't only have folks who are in the arts, like for example, in a couple of weeks, we're like volunteering on a Black woman owned farm. She has like 5 acres in Denver. And so we're going there and like, we're doing like sustainable like planting and learning about like sustainability in farming in terms of like social justice. So it's not just within the performing arts, it's just like this whole scope of like, what can your full life in this be?
Which is important, right? So because our stories aren't only in informed by the music and the studies we have taken on, but they are encompassing our entire life. So this is the idea of storytelling, narrative, right, and fully like a holistic storytelling in that way, telling all of the stories that I talked about with justice. So by going to these farms in the same way, these are great ideas. I think all of you can kind of take on, where can your music, where can your initiatives go beyond? Like, how can you mine, this is a bad way to say it, but to mine the stories, mine the experiences of these people by interviewing them, by interviewing these composers, by interviewing the people that are on the ground in these communities, using it, helping use it as a vehicle to bring more awareness from that side of things and to tie them together. Like, where do the worlds converge, which will then bring, I guess, bring greater awareness for both sides or multiple sides, of the coin in that way. I think it will be even more fulfilling. So this is really exciting.
Yeah, I think something that's also really important to the work, like wherever you are, whether you're still on your personal journey or like doing it through your work or with your family, we don't talk about that very often, but it's like, how many of us like are doing activism work and like all these things, and then we go back to like some of our conservative family members and don't like really talk about it, right? That's a story that's like very familiar. And so like, how are you like fostering some kind of change or like education like in your everyday life, without just, because I think what I struggle with is like, okay, well, I do all these things for work and it's great, but then what happens when I go home? Like, do I just like put it away in a drawer and I can like keep, like, I don't know. Does that make sense? And
No,
so
it's compartmentalization. sometimes for survival, sometimes because those conversations are polarizing, right? And the topics, the true, honest topics that and initiatives that you are tackling on the day to day. Sometimes one doesn't want to, as you talked about, asking some of your Black colleagues to make work in June, or, but I want to say that. June was just another moment in time in which these socio-political issues are happening in this country and many other countries. But it was especially even more heated, but also to see how it extends globally, right? So it is hard in that way, but I think the first and foremost step is to talk. Open and honest communication, but the communication, not necessarily, I saw a lot of language around like, I'm not going to say anything, I'm just going to listen, which is great to listen, but also having honest conversations and not necessarily just trying to mine for for knowledge, because one has to do their own work as well. One singular person is not your encyclopedia or your library to understand how to move. One moves through the world and through life. One has to go to the library themselves. Ana, are you going to wrap up? And then Jay, I think you had raised your hand about something. I wasn't sure, but let's bring you on as well. Or just pop in. Feel free to, you guys just come in as you see it fit. Ana?
Yeah, I'll just like end with this little thought that for me is really important too, is I think like having a really strong sense of like what your identity is, and just like really standing in that is really important in this work as well, because, sorry, my dog is like playing with a bone. At least he's not barking. But just having a strong sense of who you are and like not being apologetic for that, right? Whether that is white or Black or Latinx or whatever it is, right? And then authentically doing the work is really important, because I've had in this work folks try to erase like what my full identity as I'm French, but I'm also Colombian. Neither of my parents are American. They both came to this country in the 90s, like not speaking the language, right? And so there's just like and I did all of middle school in Colombia too. So like have very much like lived within both of my identities, and there's some erasure of that happens sometimes in like these heated exchanges and like things that can pop up in this work. And so just the more you grow confident and like, this is my identity, this is how I benefit from systems of oppression, and this is how I'm maybe being oppressed or not at all oppressed, right? It just depends. I would recommend folks look up social identity wheels if you've never done one before. It's like, for me, it was like one of the most confronting things I had to do as like a mixed cultural person. It's really difficult. And so, but then that can help you move forward in the work. And so just like fully embracing like who you are, whether that is white, right? Like the people who have historically oppressed others, or that is like folks who have been historically excluded, standing in that and then going into the work like honestly and openly, and knowing that you're always going to make mistakes because that's like how we grow and how we change. So that's something that's really important to me, and I've just been thinking more about identity as well because it was something that was taken away from me a lot. So yeah, I'm gonna let Jay speak now.
Thank you for that. Really great. This is so great. Jay?
Thank you. Just thinking about the idea of returning to in-person mediums, even as of course we all are adjusting to a slightly different one. And I do hope that a lot of what is online will stay online for those who are interested in zooming in from around the world or from in their homes who are not able to make it out to events in person. I think it's really important that that still happens. For me, this is also coinciding with the move to LA. For those of you who know, I'm going to be a fellow with the LA Orchestra Fellowship there. And I think something that has been very important, going back to the idea of being within a community, you have to scope out, I think, what is already there. Oh, thank you for the claps. It's so important to see what organizations are already doing the work that you may be interested in. One of my great inspirations in this has been Street Symphony. I know a lot of you probably have already become very, very familiar with their work, but just knowing that there are basically ways to be in there and not reinvent the wheel, and also that you can be part of a greater history. Somebody was talking about lineage, for us at Sound Off. I mean, it was really important. Giancarlo played on this, to play works that actually had a deep lineage, not only to, of course, communities of color and Black communities in particular with so much of our work, but to specifically New York. We were really excited to do like the first real nice looking pressing of Dorothy Rudmore's Modes, and she was a teacher at the Harlem School of the Arts. But I don't know, it was so special to feel that connection with a school that, at least for me, that's like 10 blocks away. It's like right down the street. And just knowing that we were, even if we were physically distanced and temporally distanced from the place of creation, from the composer herself, that we were standing in that piece that had, it was just such a history. So often it can feel like, these fly-by-night things, as Ana Luna was alluding to. It can often feel like we're going to do a one-off and then that's going to be it. It's like a pop-up organization or a pop-up need, when the need has been for forever, and the organizations that are doing work have been there forever. We're not filling in absence, but we're helping, I think, to guide and ferry along the motion that's needed.
And as it's connected to your current generation, or the needs you're seeing, the idea of trends and ideas or disparities or polarities that are happening in the communities in which you are standing in currently, or that you have experienced, or that peers of yours are experiencing. As we all talk, and sometimes it's very much so behind closed doors, and sometimes so few of those streams actually go beyond those doors, or they get into a room that can kind of help affect those changes, even if you're working for an organization. So sometimes it's how can you partner in a way to kind of build the momentum to get the rock over the hill, and then through the door, to kind of help start at least those conversations. But it's not necessarily always about the talking, but it's also about the listening, and then and even better understanding. Yes, Jay? Mm-hmm.
This might be a different kind of listening than you were talking about, but I also wanted to pivot to the idea of the way that I think specifically what's unique about all three of our organizations is the way that we talk to our audiences. it might be because we are so familiar oftentimes with our audiences, and as our organizations get bigger, of course, they will be a little bit less familiar. But all of us, I think, had in mind the idea that our audiences were going to, they're going to learn something when they come to a concert. They're going to learn something, even if it's not like pedagogical. They were going to, learn something about a person's humanity. They were going to learn something about a person's story. And we, I think, are speaking to the needs of, actually musicians who, so many of us have been part of these like histories, with our families, but on the classical music side have been told to hush hush about it. And so seeing that like ability to speak out, feeling like we can do that, using the privilege that it is to be a Western classical musician, our access to a stage, our access to people. I was talking about this with somebody from Juilliard, 415 program, another student of color who they felt sort of just sad about the idea of even being in, the Baroque program, essentially, as a person of color and what that meant. And so I was talking to them, and I sort of just said, listen, like, if we were not with an instrument in our hands, at six, as at Lincoln Center's one train stop, people would never stop for us. But we do have such incredible power with instruments in our hands, and we have to make the best use of them, I think.
And many times you are the first, only different. And so you have to find a way to say, how do you open that door? How do you use the platforms? So many times people find, especially if you have this like say emerging, or up and coming, but like you still have a platform, and how can you bring the many platforms together to create a meta platform to kind of get those things out, and to help others through and gain further exposure. I'm looking at the time because I want to be very aware of what's happening. I want to open the floor if there are those that would like to ask questions, and then I have one final question for you all before we wrap up. But do we have a few quick questions from the audience? I think Brandon maybe had one. Brandon, please welcome Brennan Kaplan.
Hello. Well, I wouldn't say my question is quick, but first I'd like to say, thank you all for speaking. This is the type of conversation I wish we had more often, because a lot of times it can be very ugly and reactive and not proactive. And I'm really just blown away by all y'all. And, and welcome to Los Angeles, Jay. It's really hot here right now. So, a lot of what you've all been saying, and just with NextFest in general, I've been thinking about kind of my own personal activism that I do. And so I'm a gay composer, musician, and I wouldn't call it my brand, but I really try to lend my talents to queer causes when I can. Like I did a huge orchestration project for a play called Quilt. And that was for charity, and oh my God, it's 102 there. That's crazy. And like I play piano with a queer synagogue here in Los Angeles, and it's very personal for me. And it's also educational. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts. Well, I'm just trying to find my space within that, because like for me, it's personal as a queer identifying person, but I'm also white, but I'm also Jewish. There's all this intersectional identity, and it's such a learning process. And I don't know, like I'm sometimes not sure what to do. Like, when do I hold back? When do I step forward? We spoke with Jeff from Imani Wins earlier, and he said something very powerful to me, and I got a little watery-eyed when I was telling him a bit about my musical journey. He was like, your story still matters too. And no one's ever told me that. And I'm just like thinking about it all.
Well, I think this is great. So the idea of one feeling like me, I think Sam, you hinted at this a little bit before, like to do nothing, or just maybe I shouldn't be doing this thing, as a way of there is a side to to the work of working with humans.
Yeah.
And we feel that it can be so reactionary and so touchy that I need to discount myself because historically, white men have been at the forefront of everything as far as what has been told or what has been innovated or what has been told to be innovated or to be created. And so therefore,
I've had friends tell me to shut up and not speak, and that, you know,
it's important to have balances between listening and then balances between speaking, and not that there should be a funnel to for one or the other. I think it has to be a feedback loop. I think that is the only way in which to really actually learn something on both sides. I think if one side, side that is disenfranchised and under many different realms is only ever just talking, I think it's important to talk and to share those stories, but also to figure out no two people walk through the world in the same exact way and are going to identify in the exact same way. There are communities and cultures that share a common bond of quite a few things, obviously, yes, but we have to be able to tell our individual stories and not necessarily always a woe is me, because I think in many times when we talk about disenfranchised groups, it's always about the darknesses of that, but also how do we lift up and how do we celebrate the joys? How do we also talk about the rest that needs to happen for those people, even those of you, Ana, Jay, Sam, that are doing this groundwork, you know, in many different facets? It's exhausting. So how do we also pull back in a way to make sure that you are resting for that, so you actually can continue doing the work, you can continue listening? But I think for the most part, the thing I can impart to you, Brandon, that I have to kind of start to wrap it up here, is that you should feel free. You know, I think sometimes people feel as if they are waiting. You're waiting for permission. And I think that is something that is steeped sometimes either culturally or it's steeped, well, culturally, I think of that broadly, but especially when you're coming up through a conservatory, because not all of your needs or all parts of your story and identities are being referenced, and you're being told that yes, you can do this thing. So instead of waiting for that, you know, authoritarian kind of key to the thing, you should take it on your own volition to actually start the thing. But I think finding groupings of people or circles or spaces in which you feel comfortable and safe to do those things, because sometimes it's not always that. As Jay said, yes, you are in these programs and you're doing these things, but you strip away the instrument and you are just another person walking down the street. Will you be paid attention to, or will the wrong type of attention be drawn to you? Not because you want it, but just because that is the way in which society sadly does work in certain situations, and that has nothing directly to do with you. But to try to find a way to surround yourself with communities and people that will truly back you up and be there for you. So I want to try to now close out with one final question for Jay, Sam, and Ana Luna is, what do you hope for?
Sorry, I'm just seeing this comment in the chat of someone wanting to ask a question.
Oh, Eric. Okay, I see
I'm
here.
so sorry.
Well, think about that. Think about that question. And Eric, feel free to come on and ask a question.
Hi, sorry, I don't want to.
No, you're good. You're good.
I'm trying to think how to phase this, but I just kind of had a question for the three of you that I was curious about. So I'm actually a ballet dancer, which I think, along with the realm of classical music, is its own sort of insular, isolated, sort of strange art form, trying to figure out where it exists in the world. And similarly, I actually, at the beginning of the pandemic, sort of like started a nonprofit, but didn't mean to, but it sort of just kept evolving, but it actually had nothing to do with art. It's around food access. And so I'm curious about, it feels like the three of you all sort of saw these structural problems within the larger scheme of classical music, and then kind of went off on your little routes to kind of figure out like what can I do in like these kind of smaller, more like specific ways of like getting your friends together, your groups, or like finding people that would listen to you in those spaces. I wonder on like a larger scale, like, because for me, like, I don't even know where to begin. Like that, I think that's why like I went in the other direction of like, I'm gonna work in this area because it feels like more like manageable or something than like trying to start to tackle like the larger like structural issues of the art form that I've been in my whole life. Interestingly enough. And so I just wonder, like, for the three of you, if you guys struggle with sort of that, and like when you look at the larger pictures of the symphonies of the classical music at large, like how do you see your organizations like trying to sort of like start to infiltrate and like influence those like larger discussions? Because it's amazing, it's so incredible what you guys have all created. I'm just wondering, like, in the bigger picture of like things, like where do you like, it's kind of relates to where do you hope that the organizations will go, and like where do you hope to see classical music go?
Amazing question. Thank you. The floor is yours, please. Just chime in.
If I can be honest, and thank you for the question, I keep forgetting that Sound Off is a classical music organization. I'm going to be completely honest. I think it comes maybe from a sense that I am, I'm pretty comfortable. It comes and goes, but as a musician, like I know I can do what I can do, and I think for all of us, we sort of are at that level where we're like, okay, we could be musicians, or we could be whatever we do, and we would have like a fine life, I'm sure, but we have another calling. And whatever that calling is, it sort of calls us to use our gifts like in whatever direction like they can be used. So the music for me, the artistic practice is this is just the language that I speak, if that makes sense. And that's the only way I think that I can tie together what I believe in, and on I guess both ends. I remember oh gosh, there was like this really interesting presentation I saw at UMich that was basically like, when you've got an organization that wants to do two things, you've got either like artistic quality on one end, and then you've got on the other end like social impact. So you can't have both. Like you have to put yourself on one side of the road or the other. I'm like, this is so strange. This is so awful. I couldn't believe that was what students were being taught, that you sort of had to parcel yourself into one or the other. Yeah, I really don't know if this answers your question, but I think at least for me, and it's different for everybody, the path that I took for Sound Off, and I think the reason why it's so successful is because we're people who speak the language of music. We're not dabblers, and we're not too precious actually about the kind of music that we make. We know we're good. We have people from like Public Quartet, Nargis Quartet, like we have these amazing composers. Like I'm not gonna brag about them, but they are really powerful musicians who also care about something else very deeply. And I think for me, the true heart of it has to be in that people to people connection, that personal connection. Because music is a language, but the reason we speak English is not to speak English, right? The point of English is to communicate. So that's what I have on that.
Yeah, I'd say I'd like to answer Eric and Seth's question at the same time, just for the sake of time, because I know we're out of it.
Oh no, you can answer them separately.
Well, I think I'm just going to keep my response brief. I think that sometimes my response is like, I don't know if I want to be a part of like the classical institutions that have been around my whole life. Like, I don't know if I want to like work with an orchestra in that kind of capacity ever again. Like 5 years ago, if you had asked me, I was like, I want to be like a section musician for a really good orchestra. And like, that has changed so much. Like that's not at all in my on my bucket list anymore. So I just wonder, yeah, I wonder if like, unfortunately the two are becoming separate, and if they merge again, like I would love to see that, but I think that's extremely complicated, and classical music itself is like so charged with so much like problematic stuff that it's really difficult to see like 10 years down the line that those things have like merged. I really hope that they do, but I just wonder if the performing arts are going in a different direction and if that's okay. So I'd also like to say that Performers for Change, I also had like quite a bit of dancers on board. So I'm not just working with musicians, but I'm working with like really great dancers, and we also had some spoken word artists too. So I think I'm always thinking of the intersection between all of the art forms and like how we can bridge that as well. And that's why I love NextFest so much. So little shout out to NextFest, because I think like modern music and arts and all of these things is like the future, is all of us collaborating together and making just like really beautiful art. So that's my response. I don't know if the two need to, and also don't overwhelm yourself with like looking at the big picture, because if not, nothing would get done. Like I would just lay in bed all day and like, you know, just not even get up at that point, because it's just too massive to like stare. It's too massive to zoom out that majorly. I think you can zoom in on like the little things you can do, and without feeling like there's, you know, like whatever like step on your journey you take, like that's the right one. And then you go from there. It doesn't need to be like, it doesn't need to change tomorrow. Like it's going to take some time. So don't overwhelm yourself with like trying to fix like the systemic racism in like ballet. You know what I mean? Like that's too big a question. It's like, how can you zoom in on that?
Exactly. How can you do the work that will directly affect the kind of sphere you're already in, and choose one area to kind of start with. And I don't think you should shy away necessarily from orchestra or having a collaboration. If you would have told me um, when I was you all's age that I would have become the inaugural artist in residence for a major symphony orchestra in helping steer programming, designing a brand new concert hall, and also community engagement and outreach, and redesigning that. How do we cipher funds in a very specific way, working with the city at large on that kind of project? Huge undertaking. Again, wasn't prepared, but had a great cohort of people to kind of stand by my side and with me and help me along the way. So there's other ways beyond being in a section, because even that in itself it's complicated, because it's people, it's interpersonal, working relationships. So find an area that within your field, or one specific area that you can speak to truthfully, speak from what and start there. That's a good jumping off point, and then finding like-minded people, even intersectionalizations of those things that can kind of help you launch you forward, and then build build it all together to make it even bigger as you go through. But Sam?
Yeah, I think I just want to that I think everything but what y'all are saying are really fantastic. I think I just wanted to bounce back to what Jay was saying about kind of it's like what the medium is kind of how we communicate, right, with that idea about English. And that's like, it's not really about English, it's about like, bridging the gap. And that I found that music, and especially bass, and which is its own very tightly wound conservative community, is kind of my way in. And there was a lot of people that I could directly talk to, and people like, for example, like principals and assistant principals of major orchestras who now want to showcase and play the pieces. That's kind of a big deal, and kind of being able to then have pieces being played by people who have access to really great equipment, or people who have really great access to concert halls, then kind of opens a door for us to then just have a bigger conversation about what we're doing and what it means to have these works included in the canon. And so I think it starts really small, but then I feel like it very easily balloons into something much bigger. And you can, you can talk about orchestral programming, because we've been, and to, I know you wanted to answer a question separately, but we've, for a long time, a big dream of ours is to have a big orchestral commission for a bass concerto. And, having, a huge, a large scale piece with, say a principal of a major orchestra on the stage, and where, obviously symphony is a largely white space, having that be a forefront for us is a big deal. And I think then we start to then be able to talk about other things that are going on, like, oh, like, why haven't I heard this composer's name before, or blah blah blah, and then you get to ears that have never heard these things or these names before, or these people. And it's so important, especially and I think I put somewhere about kind of introducing these concepts into larger white spaces, which is so important, because I mean, just to briefly talk about kind of programming in major orchestras, you have usually a board that's a little geriatric, and so we and mostly white, so there's a lot of Tchaikovsky, there's a lot of Beethoven. Beethoven had a birthday last year. He was everywhere, and he was everywhere every year too. And just to be able to present in that space then makes it, we kind of just starting to break through, because I think that's kind of the last holdout, in those kind of very extremely white gatekeeping spaces. And so for me, I was like, this is a way in that we can start to break this down a little bit, is to then start to slowly infiltrate and enter this process.
Thank you. Eric, I hope this provides you some ideas to kind of get started. I'm sure you have your own in a way, but I think the important thing is to kind of start from what you know. And I think the idea of kind of food scarcity is an amazing one, especially as we think about, the idea of just people, not necessarily just artists. I mean, but to be very honest and truthful, as we see in the midst of one thing we have learned from 2020 is kind of the scarcity of finances, especially amongst freelance artists, and what that actually looks like, and how to create the access without feeling ashamed, because at once some things felt like, oh, that's their problem, oh, they're not doing well enough, or this is something that only pertains to one specific group or a specific person. But now we have a global situation where there are a lot of out of work people, and that are struggling to kind of keep going on multiple spheres, that can feel embarrassing that they've even arrived at this point, in moments where, they had full concert seasons, or, whatever it may have been, they're booked and busy, as I like to say. And now it's like, how do we keep going? Where do you find the access, even as an artist, but most importantly as a person, to kind of keep going? So this is important. And so, Jay, maybe it would be great if you all can find ways of linking. I mean, this will be a good moment for you to put your social media things in here into the chats, for those that would like to know more about you, or find ways of even finding ways to collaborate on specific areas, and going from there. But thank you all again. If there are any further questions, if not, maybe there's going to be a fellows talk after this. I'm not sure. There possibly will be. Peter, yes, hello.
Hey, thanks to all of you. This is so great. What an amazing conversation, and thanks for leading, Seth. And so I want to encourage all of you to find out more about these three organizations. I encourage them to be shameless in self-promotion about these things. If you can donate, please donate. As we heard over and over again, funding is a thing. So please do make a donation if you're able. Thanks so much to Sam and Jay and Ana Luna and Seth. So I just want to thank all of you for such an amazing conversation, and for all the work that you're doing. And I'm super proud of all of the work that you've done, and so inspired by you, and just so grateful that you came on to talk about it. So thanks. Good night, everybody.